Welcome everyone to the Columbia River Basin team meeting. I'm Stephen Phillips with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. I'd like to thank the Fish and Wildlife Service, Portland and Denver offices, as well as the Bonneville Power Administration for funding this event. This event will be recorded, and all of the information from Columbia River Basin team meetings can be found at westernais.org. If you go to the coordination tab and click on regional, the 100th Meridian Initiative stuff is there. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Leah. She'll go over any rules to the road. And then this morning session will be led by Tim Cunahan and Robin Drawheim on monitoring. Leah, take it from here.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. I just want to mention just some of the housekeeping pieces, which by now are probably second nature to all of us. But if you do have specific questions, just pop those into the question or the chat box, whatever is visible to you. It's very helpful if you put who the question is directed to, obviously, so we can circle back to the right person. Let's see, other than that, as Stephen mentioned, this will be recorded and we'll have that posted later, each 2 sessions of the day. So now I guess I would like to hand it over to Mr. Cunahan, who will be kicking off the monitoring forum. So let me pull up some of your PowerPoint stuff, Tim, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Leah, and welcome everybody to what will now be our 3rd virtual convening of the Columbia River Basin Dry-Scented Mussel Monitoring Forum. Hard to believe, but true, and hopefully the next time we will be in person. So here's hoping. Anyways, this morning we'll start out. I'm going to present some information on kind of a follow-up to the dry-scented mussel research prioritization workshop that we held in 2015. That will be followed by Robin presenting some information on the monitoring map using the information that you guys have provided to us, and then we'll wrap up with the important updates from you all on the status of dry-scented mussel monitoring for 2021. So with that, we if you could call up my short presentation on the workshop. Are folks seeing that?
If you can see it, Tim, then everyone else can. Can you see just the PowerPoint or no?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't. Hi, Blaine.
I see Blaine.
Yeah.
Ah.
Is it showing?
Yep, it's a little truncated.
Huh.
But that's okay, I'll just continue on. So as I mentioned, there we go. This past year, we put in a proposal to QZAP, the QZAP funding opportunity to address a QZAP action item, and the action item was to have a follow-up workshop from our 2015 workshop where we laid out dry-scented mussel research priorities. Fortunately, we were funded to do that, and we're thankful for that. But we've convened a steering committee to kind of get the workshop together, and I'm going to kind of provide you an update with the progress that we've made on that. But the steering committee is made up of Steve Bollins from Washington State University, myself, Stephen Phillips, and Barak Shamai, and Teresa Thome. Next slide, please. So, like I said, this is a follow-up to our original workshop. I assume that most of you attending here were at that workshop. If not, it's available online. So really, our thought here is that the original workshop helped us organize our thoughts around priorities. And we're hoping that the follow-up to that workshop will help us document where we are in achieving those original priorities, essentially using it as a way to track progress towards addressing the research needs identified in the original workshop. We had further discussions about how during this workshop we would like the research needs to support management goals and objectives, specifically those outlined in KEYS App 2.0. We need to make sure that we're up to date on what research is occurring nationally and internationally. For example, the upcoming meeting in Belgium for the international conference. Making sure that any ongoing research that needs additional support is identified. Also coming to some type of consensus about what has been adequately addressed and what hasn't, and issues that may have fallen off the table as far as being priorities because of technological advancements and other advancements. Again, we want to focus on management relevance, but we also recognize the need to encompass basic and forward-thinking research, as that is an important component. And there was also a discussion specifically about including social science and into this, and that was something that was identified in the first workshop in 2015, but really kind of has not received a lot of attention. Next slide, please. So we're proposing to structure the workshop by convening a series of webinars. Unfortunately, the continuation of our virtual existence. And then we're going to summarize the results of the workshop in a published report like we did last time. We're going in that report, we're hoping to map research priorities to management goals. Again, trying to get at specifically how research is supporting management. And also, similar to what we had done last time, rank the priorities high, medium, and low. And I think in addition to listing the priorities, again, following up on the mapping research to management goals part of this, I think we need to be very forward and upfront about why it is important to conduct these research priorities. Essentially, what is it going to do for us? Next slide, please. So along those lines, we're in the process of developing a potential list of presentations and attendees. There was a thought that we need to have the attendees be a mix of state and federal scientists, a university, tribal and industry representatives as well, and that there's adequate representation across all of the different components of research emphasis focal areas like prevention, detection, control, monitoring, biology, and human dimensions, social sciences, and outreach. So along those lines, we'll be querying this community for suggestions along those lines. And we will be sending out various other materials as far as pre-workshop questionnaires and surveys. Next slide, please. So among the group, we had proposed a couple of different sets of workshop dates, those being October 12th through the 13th and 19th through the 20th. We're going to seek your feedback on whether those dates work for most of you in the near future. And with that, if there's any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me, and that would be great. But right now, I would like to open it up and hear if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions or concerns or comments on what we're doing.
All right, folks,
And
so
if-
if you have questions for Tim, you can put them in the question box or raise your hand for me, and I will do my best to find you in our list.
And if not, that's fine. There will be ample opportunity to provide feedback and suggestions going forward. Again, this is not, this is obviously going to be a collaborative and community exercise. It's, we're going to be leaning on all of you to help us identify topics and presenters and that are of interest to you and that you feel that are useful. So that's really the intent of the workshop, is to kind of take what we did in 2015 and move the ball forward from there. Trying to keep it up to date. And I think it's a good idea to do this workshop, and hopefully you all do too. So I guess with that, Leah, I think that's all that I have, unless anybody has any questions.
I don't see any questions yet. So obviously reach out to Tim if something strikes you after the meeting. Okay, so.
See, if we were in person, I would just be calling on people.
Right, exactly. Okay, are you ready to move on to the monitoring then,
I
Tim?
think so, yep.
Okay. Let me make sure it's showing the right thing here.
Can you go back one, Leah? Ooh.
I can. It keeps doing this fun, like.
Yeah, it's doing. I tried to set it up for the whole bit.
So go.
Oh, the picture of the map is
Yeah.
perfect place
Okay.
to start.
Is it displaying now?
Now I just get a black screen.
Oh, really? How about that?
There we go. Okay, great.
Yay.
Woo, good morning, everyone. This is often something that we show at the end of this morning workshop session, but we'll just jump into it right away here. If you're not familiar with this, this is the current zebra and quagga mussel monitoring map that is hosted by Pacific States. You can get to it from the magical Western AIS web page. It's a great thing to show you live, but unfortunately it sucks all of the memory up on my laptop, and so you would get nothing but buffering problems. So I'll let you explore it on your own if you haven't already had a chance to play around with it. This is our forward-facing public map. So this just shows us the monitoring data that we collected last winter. Collected from you last winter, that you collected in mostly the summer months. And it includes 8 states and 1 province. We've gotten data from all the Columbia River Basin participants, as well as additional data from on this map from California, Utah, and Colorado here. It also includes the efforts by the Army Corps and the Bureau of Reclamation, as well as Portland State University, Washington State University, and the Flathead Lake research folks. In addition to that, there's a much larger number of contributors who participate at the state level, and then we were able to access that data from each of the participating states who sent us in data. Each one of these dots has a bunch of information behind it. And Leah, if you could just click once, we'll start to see what that looks like. Just anywhere, just click forward, like you're progressing to that. Yeah, there you go. So the random dot that I clicked on for this was sent in from the Idaho Department of Agriculture. Most of our sites have a bunch of background information on them. So you'll get the water body name, the sampling location description, if there's one. Can you click again? Yes, and then this will tell you the date that it was sampled on, a little bit more about the location, and what's important information for a lot of folks is what the target was. So we're looking at villagers or adults, sample collection method for most of these. They're plankton toads, but oftentimes It's also an eDNA water sample, or it could be a plant rake toss, a substrate sampler, etc. And so we have all of this data. Again, this is forward facing, so you have a few ways of searching through this. But next slide. The utility for you all may come in this password protected planning tool. And in this case, this is a searchable feature where you can not only import, or rather export, all of the data in an Excel spreadsheet format, but you can also sort through it. It acts much more like an app. So you can filter, sort, export. This tool is really much more specific to the Columbia River Basin, so the amount of data that's in it is not as great as the one that's forward facing. And if you don't have the login and password, we can send that to you. I didn't want to put that on here because we published all of our slides, and it's no longer necessarily password protected for everybody. One of the things that we were hoping to do with this planning tool is to really fine tune it to your needs. So if this is a tool that helps you as a monitoring entity select sites, timing, types of monitoring, that's where we really want feedback in terms of, is anyone using this? If you're not using it or you want to use it, what is keeping you from using it? Or is there other data that we could be putting in here? We've tried a couple years running to really get at a measure of how intense sampling might be at a particular site or in a particular location. You can see this is displayed in kind of a heat map format at this level of resolution. You can really drill down to the specific sites, but it does tell you the number of samples happening in a location and then down to a specific site. But are there other resources that you want to see here? Are there other layers that we could be using? Or is it maybe something that we're moving away from now that most of the states have the ability to do their own GIS mapping at this kind of level? So that's what I wanted to run through in terms of monitoring data for last year, both the monitoring map viewer and the public facing map that's available at the Western AIS website. Again, I know these Zoom calls are really tough in terms of facilitating back and forth on utility and where we can go next. But if you want to think about it, if you don't have an answer right now, feel free to contact Tim and I about what you'd like to see be different in this particular planning tool. So at this point, I'll take any questions or comments, or we can move on.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Go ahead, Nick.
It's more of a comment, obviously. Just kudos to this group for compiling this information. It's so powerful, and just being a state group, managing our state data is enough, and working through that, funneling through you guys to see the bigger picture. It's so powerful. Same with the inspection station maps, which I'm sure we'll get to, but specifically with this monitoring data, I just appreciate you guys pulling this together.
Thanks for that, Nick. Say, Nick is also really excellent at getting me his data, so good job.
So Robin, how did the data processing go this year? As far as
this year
timing?
took a little bit longer, but we're still in pandemic time, so yeah. That's about it. I think everyone's really settled into how they collect their own data, and so it's pretty seems pretty straightforward in terms of once I get the information, there's not a lot of fiddling I have to do with it. And I think at this point, Van, who is actually doing all the GIS work, has found that there's even less error fixing that he has to do on his end. Occasionally you'll get sites in the Atlantic Ocean that may not actually have been sampled for zebra quagga mussels, but it's looking, the data quality is looking better and better every year.
That's fantastic. So does anybody have any suggestions or thoughts on the form or data call, kind of how to make that better, or is that working for people? Jesse, how about you?
Oh, there he goes. He's unmuted. Nope. Jesse, do you have a comment? You're still mute. Oh, there you go.
I'm practicing.
Okay.
Well, I guess I will say it might be the kind of thing that during the next research priorities workshop, we fold in and maybe spend some time really thinking about what is useful. Is it useful to expand this? Is it useful to maybe manage the data differently? Is there an output that is maybe more useful to folks? I know we've gotten some feedback in the past where entities have said being able to go to the Western AIS site and screenshot that map and pull it into a document is really useful, but are there other things that we could be doing with this data?
So Robin, it looks like we do have a question. Blaine is asking, in terms of the lack of info from the Dakotas and Nebraska. So I think some context might be helpful, of like why we don't have monitoring information, I guess, outside of that block of the CRB from the Dakotas and Nebraska.
I will I maybe pass that over to Stephen, but my understanding is that the funding that we get to do this has been specific to the Columbia River Basin. I know there's been a couple of little thoughts about, can we expand this to other basins, and is that utility there for them as well?
Correct. So over the many years of especially Bonneville Power Administration partially funding this, it's a good question, Blaine. The funding is directed at the Columbia River Basin, so we haven't gotten into the Missouri, and it's also a staffing issue. If we're really not set up right now to be a Western database and map, but that may change. I mean, lots of discussions are going on what the future holds. So that's why we're mostly a Columbia River Basin shop.
And I'll say it's been really easy to get Colorado's data. And so that's often why they show up there, even though they're really outside of the basin. The same with Utah. California, we've been trying to push better California and Nevada data simply to see what's happening nearby. And that gives folks an idea of risk in terms of monitoring. For whatever reason, Nevada has for the last couple of years declined to share their data. And so we don't have that information on this map.
I have a question from Tamara Knudsen. Tamara, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you want to go ahead, Tamara, and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, guys. I just had a quick question about the tool. And I see on here we have 5 different colors, 6 different colors. There's a green one that's collected and an orange one that says unknown. And I was wondering, can you tell me what do those two things mean? If we have established, failed, and eradicated, we know that samples have been collected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of wondering, what are those two categories and what qualifies as unknown?
That is a great question. All of the non-purple data, so most of the data to the east of us, has been pulled out of the USGS NAS site and their zebra quagga mussel mapping. And so that's sort of a more static data set that's just there as a visual update of what mostly presence absence of the mussels are. So collected in this case means that there isn't, or at that point wasn't, establishment data for those particular sites. I believe that may be, I'll have to check with Van as to when those pieces were last updated. But yes, the non sort of magenta purple data points all come from the USGS NAS map.
Okay, do you know what the unknown represents?
I think that's the unknown, either that's unknown status or, yes, I believe that's unknown status of that location.
Does that mean we don't know if they're there, or does that mean the species hasn't been confirmed?
We don't know if they are considered established at that point. I do see some sites up in that I would say we do have confirmation and they may need to be updated, and I don't know if that's the USGS NAS map not having been updated or this particular map.
Okay, I was asking specifically because I was down at Glen Canyon Dam this April, and we pulled into one of the bays there, and there's mussels that cake the entire shoreline. I mean, you're walking on them, crunching them, and when I look at the map here, I just see these orange unknown dots, and so I was just wanted to confirm what that really meant.
I'm guessing that this the USGS data that's been pulled in on this set has not been updated in a year.
And I think that's a good point, that we do need to keep that current.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because really, kind of the intent of it is to provide context to known distributions of mussels and where we're sampling. So
exactly, and so I can send that feedback back to Van, and we can
great observation.
Pull that in.
Unfortunately, I would call them established there.
Oh yeah.
If you're walking all over them, I think that they're established.
Yes. I agree. But that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question from Teresa Thome from Fish and Wildlife Service. Teresa, I've unmuted you if you want to go ahead and make your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. No, I just wanted to say this is super helpful, or the website has been very helpful for me, and especially that it's inclusive of the Canadian provinces and data into Canada as well. And so that's definitely a benefit. So thank you so much for doing that and all the effort that goes into compiling this information. I can definitely echo Nick's support for this. So thanks, and keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you for that feedback. It's good to know that folks find it useful.
Thanks, Teresa.
We probably could add some of our Fish and Wildlife Service monitoring as well. It's eDNA sampling at some of our fish hatcheries. So Robin, I'll work with you on getting that information to you.
That sounds great. Yeah, and in the past we've gotten U.S. Forest Service information as well, and this year, because they usually have crews collecting their data, they weren't able to send in any. They didn't have any. So.
And then just kind of looking at the USGS database just right now, it doesn't look like there is any question on you know, site locations for quagga mussel presence in in the lower Colorado. So I guess I don't know what the issue, like I'm not sure what's going on there, but
Yeah, I'll note that this is a static data set. So this data set is not linked live to their updates.
okay.
So we can
Cool.
probably put a disclaimer in there for this non-public facing one.
And we can work with the NAS folks to perhaps make that a smoother transition somehow.
Robin
So,
and Tim, there's another question. Oh.
Woohoo! It's a banner day.
People are getting, more interested in sharing like via this online platform. Okay, so this is from Blaine Parker. This is related to the legend in terms of that increasing size of that feature. I think the pink. Does that mean samples per location per year? So maybe a little more background of interpretation there.
Gotcha. Yes, that is what it means, and it's based on the resolution that you're looking at. So as you increase the, I'm always getting these mixed up. As you blow up the map and get closer, you'll see those numbers go down, and they just sort of, there's a reference, a size reference that shrinks as you magnify the map. And so at some point you'll get down to a layer of resolution where you're seeing the number of samples per individual site, and right now you're seeing it as a more lumped location there. But this is my invitation to mess around with the map and see how it works. Tim is going to give me the actual terms for this.
Spatial resolution, I think, is what you're looking for.
Yes, thank you. Whew.
Okay, another question from Jen Bear. She asks, are there data available prior to 2016? The map seems blank for the years 2015 through 2010.
On this one, no. For the other one, they should be there. I'm not sure why they would have disappeared, but we can. Jen, are you talking about the Western AIS map? If so, then yeah, they should be there, and that's another note I can send to see if there's been some issues with getting those uploaded.
See, this is the benefit of having people in the website.
Yeah. And you'll see our collection data. If you play around with that, our collection information has changed a lot from the early years. We were at some point tagging other species, mud snails, Eurasian water milfoil on there, and we put out a survey, and that was not something that was useful to this team, and so we've stopped collecting that other information. So there has been some change over time as we try and really refine what information we really want to pinpoint with this, and a lot of that had to do with everyone collecting a very different subset of sampling data.
Yeah, let me add. So all of these questions are really helpful because the history of this thing is we've been doing it on a very reasonable budget for a very long time. And we'll continue doing that, but there's obviously there's some perhaps need for additional utility has been pointed out with the static nature of the USGS feature on there. Tim and I and others have been discussing what we're going to do in the future. We talked about Missouri River Basin. So if we are to move forward with a larger effort on this, these types of discussions, as I said, these types of discussions are very helpful. We want to make sure that the beauty of this is that it can survive for a long time because it's it's of reasonable cost. When we start ramping things up, you know, there's a lot of databases out there that have not been updated in a long time, and we want to make sure this one survives. So to do that, you go simple and then you build out from there.
All right, guys, I have another comment question for you. Actually, two here. Let's see. Cassandra Hagman asks, how do we provide you with information on monitoring? Lake Roosevelt NRA does boat inspections and shoreline monitoring. A contributor, it sounds like.
Whew, that's always good. I will get in touch with you. I think for some locations, there's just turnover in personnel. And so if we don't hear back from someone, it's hard to tell if they don't have the data or if they're no longer there. So you guys may have been a victim of, we were getting your data from someone else. Oftentimes, for like Roosevelt, I think, Jesse, do you guys pull that into your Washington data set? Can't recall.
For Roosevelt, we got Tamara, Mclean tribe, and then Caldwell, Holly that we get pulled in. So for NPS, when Megan Lyons was there, they were doing monitoring, and then when she left, that fell.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of folks involved, and I apologize for that falling through, but we can get you on the map, so I can reach out.
And Tim, I have actually an interesting suggestion for your monitoring workshop. So Jen Bear says maybe a user testing session, I'm assuming on this database here, during the monitoring workshop in the fall.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I would like to say kudos to Robin and Van for all their hard work on this, but also want to mention that none of this would actually be possible without the hard work and dedication of everybody getting us the information. So that's really, it's kind of amazing to me that it happens so seamlessly and so willingly. So it's been, I think it's just been a great thing to see. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Everyone's really been great about getting me data and rarely complains when I bug them about it. So it's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
Obligatory cat.
Okay,
Visit.
I don't see any new questions or chat. So. Okay, Tim, would you like to move on, or are there any more questions or things that you guys want to address in this portion?
I think we're good. I think, is it 10:40, Leah?
It is 10:40 Pacific, 11:40 Mountain.
DC, yep. Anthony. I think we should move on. The next portion of this section of the webinar is getting updates from everybody conducting monitoring and seeing how everything is going. To that end, is Anthony on the call?
He is, and he's just unmuted.
So we would start with Bureau of Reclamation because I know Anthony's got some other things he's got going on.
So this is Anthony Pruchner. I'm the Snake River Area Office Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator. Heidi couldn't make it, so I will cover my work and her stuff throughout the region. Our regional lab was able to get out last year, and they are already out sampling this year. So we had a few hiccups last year and didn't get as much sampling as we wanted to, but we still did a majority of the typical sampling after they figured out the housing issues and all of that fun stuff. I have a calendar, but I was not able with short notice to find a list of sites. So they're usually doing sites on a 3-year rotating basis. So they'll be doing sites, some sites they do all the time every year. And then some of the lower risk sites they're doing on that 3-year rotation. So they're covering reservoirs throughout the entire region, which is basically the Columbia Basin for the most part. And then I have settling plates out within the Snake River office. So from Eastern Oregon out through Jackson. And I was unable to check any of those except for Jackson last year due to travel restrictions and fun stuff with COVID. But I have gone out and started to collect some of that so far for this year. And we will be getting the rest of those in the Upper Snake collected and temp loggers downloaded and all of that data summarized and available for partners as we move on. But that is about it. If anybody wants specific reservoirs and dates for reclamation sampling, get a hold of me or Heidi and we can send out that calendar. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony, and really appreciate you doing that on such short notice there. Surprise, you're up. So anyways, that's great from BOR. Let's move on to the state of Washington and Jesse Schultz.
Good morning.
Hey, Jesse, can you see your screen how you need it? Does that look good?
Yeah.
It's hard being the other person on this side. Sometimes I'm not sure if you're seeing what you need. Okay, go for it. Thanks.
All right, so this is just a brief overview of what we got planned for 2021 for muscle monitoring. Next slide, please. All right, so this is pretty great, pretty impressive. So you can see our co-partners, our co-managers, that's doing all this monitoring with us. It has grown since 2020, and that is a great thing. And this is a high priority to grow this list as much as possible. And it's got to be effective partners too. We're looking for all professional entities to help us do the monitoring and assist as much as possible. So we've always had the 3 PDs, Chelan, Douglas, and Grant. And this year now, with the FERC relicensing, we got Seattle City Light to partner up with us. So they've always been doing this. This is Rob and the PSD, Portland State University doing it on the Pond Array and all that. But now we've got some formal language in the FERC relicense, which is for them to operate their dam requirements. So we kind of added some language in there to get on the same page, get some good communication. And then the Caldwell Tribe too with Holly and Mclean, she's been added on, sharing data and all that. And of course, the Spokane Tribe with Tamara that she already talked. So all these water bodies that our co-partners are sampling are, the highest of the high risk water bodies, except for you can see Snohomish County PUD. They've been helping us greatly on Spada Reservoir. So it's up in north around Skagit County area. So we were monitoring Spada, but then in our risk assessment with the infrastructure and the calcium, we no longer consider it high risk. So we don't monitor it anymore. So for that is more of an opportunistic. They still care a lot about AIS. So they're continuing to monitor Spada for AIS. So, next slide. All right, so here's just another map with a lot of polka dots. So this year, this is what we plan on doing. So our highest of the high risk water bodies and sites, the goal is to monitor 3 a year and then with the lower score with our risk assessment, and then goes to 2 and 1. So it's a lot of polka dots. Next slide. Okay. So we started doing this last year. We're trying to get a baseline of every water body, every public water body in Washington. So even though a water body or a site might not be high risk, we still want to get that basic information so we can plug into our risk assessment to get a quantitative score. So most likely these are all low risk. That's why we're not monitoring to begin with, but just to get that information to prove that it shouldn't be monitored. So we've got about over 100 of these water bodies that we're going to try to get to this year. And these are quick and dirty surveys. So the main thing we want to do is get just at least one dissolved calcium, some other water quality parameters, put up some signage, and then answer all the questions in our risk assessment, such as, what's the number of boat launches, what's the boat launch, concrete, dirt, whatnot, is there a ban on gas engine, speed limit, and all that type of stuff. So I believe after we get all 100 of these water bodies done this year, and last year we got a couple hundred done, and the next year we'll hopefully finish it off. So that'll give us a great template of should be all of Washington's public water bodies. Next slide. All right. So for this year, our goals is pretty similar to last year, except for we're bumping up. We try to increase a little bit each year as our program improves. So the big difference is eDNA samples. Last year we conducted approximately 200. So this year our goal is 300. And it's kind of single. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're investing a lot of time, resources, and funds into our data collection now. And so we're strictly everything is electronic. So we go with iForms. There's multiple different types of electronic data apps you could use and all that. So this is an app. All our sampling is done. It's really slick. We could eliminate time spent on entering data and all that. And so right now, this is through DFW, but we can set up anybody to use iForms. We just have to go through our IT department where we could add samplers and whatnot. So you can see we do our 5 or 6 sample methods, including water quality. And we just go through, punch numbers down, try to be efficient as possible. So we can set anybody up with this if they wanted to go that route instead of hard copies. Next slide. Okay, so this is what our goal is, the app. So when we enter all our data into iForms, then it gets routed to a whole bunch of mess and long routes and all that. So now we did develop app. It's up and working. It's still a work in progress right now though. But instead of being in local database, now it's an app. So, but the main thing for anybody to access the app, this is where it gets a little tricky. Say if our co-partners wanted to access all the data. So in the app, it's all the data we've ever done since 2007 and whatnot. But the user has to have access to Active Directory for the state of Washington. So the way that is accessed is through basically their email and their password, but it has to be through Active Directory. So we're trying to figure out how we can bring this to all of our co-partners and co-managers. But anyways, the app is yeah, we're pretty excited to finally get in the 21st century. Next slide. All right, so all those numbers, all those goals that I just referred to up above, those are all changed a little bit now. So for 2020, we had two-person teams, and they started, you see the start date, May to October. So it's basically 2 weeks of training, and then they're in the field June to October. So we had 2 teams, one in Spokane, one in Olympia, for the entire state, doing as much as possible. They were, in the field 100% of the time, Monday through Thursday, and that was we got a lot of feedback, and yeah, that was too much being in the field 100% of the time, just what we were asking, especially with our program evolving, growing, eDNA and sediment samples and all that. It was just this, and the decontamination. Yeah, everybody knows decontamination is taking a lot of time, so that reduces our efficiency as the number of sites and samples we do, but of course it's a must. So for this year, we took that in consideration, and we wanted to hire a little earlier, spend more time with the teams training, to build morale, and not to just kill the teams going Monday through Thursday and on all their other duties with muscle monitoring. So we listened to our staff, how best can we improve? Well, the easiest thing was get another team. So we were fortunate enough, so starting, the goal is July 1st, is to create another 2-person team. So that will be our Central Washington team around Ellisburg, Yakima area, to take the burden, because when you have 2 teams, one out of Olympia, one out of Spokane, that central area of all our water bodies is drive time is a massive expenditure to get into all these sites. So we're going to establish a 3rd team and give them a little more flexibility, not in the field Monday through Thursday, 100% of the time, every week. So instead of giving them a break Monday through Wednesday, once or twice a week, to have a full day in the warehouse and the office, just to catch up and relax, so they don't have to go hard for 6 months, 100% in the field. So I think that, and of course, we've added more to our sampling program. So we're still gonna, with the 3rd team, still increase our number of samples compared to those numbers, our number of site visits and all that stuff. But with the amount of sampling for each site and the decontamination and all that stuff, it is a give and take. So next slide, please. All right, so that pretty much is a quick briefing on the 2021 Zebra Quagga muscle monitoring, and just a couple quick little side notes. Northern Pike, so with eDNA, we do analyze for Northern Pike, zebras, quaggas, and New Zealand mud snails. So May 10th, this critter was found. Somebody found this, turned it into DFW, and all of that. So we got the samples and we gave it to our lab this week to have them analyzed. So this was Lake Wallula down in Benton County, Kennewick. So we're anxiously awaiting to see what this critter is. And I'll keep everybody, once we get the results, I'll keep everybody updated on that. Next slide. Okay, so another pike update. So Potholes Reservoir is in the Basin. It's one of the highest risk water bodies. It's a amazing destination, fishing, recreation, everything. So we have 5 sites on potholes, and we actually, our last sample was October 12th at potholes, and we conducted eDNA, and we did have a positive detection. It was a high strength detection. So we wanted to go back out there, but we could not get out there until March of this year. So we went, conducted, eDNA at all our sites again, got the results, and everything turned out negative. So this is the first ever detection we had at potholes for Pike. It was, yeah, that's the way everything works though. So we had a detection, but until we have that physical evidence, we do not count as confirmed. We would, so that enacts more sampling, which we did. Nothing came about it. So we consider potholes non-established with Pike. And, oh yeah, I forgot on a side note for our eDNA sample. So for the last couple of years since we've been doing eDNA, our theory was we would conduct the eDNA towards the late summer to early fall, because we know the only way mussels are going to get into the state is through some type of human interaction. So that would, we were thinking that would give us our best possibility of detecting after the rush of all the recreational users and everybody else that uses the water bodies. But this year, we're going to conduct our eDNA more sporadically so we get a better time frame annually. So we've already started our water bodies conducting eDNA this year. Next slide. And that is it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Jesse. I don't see any questions for you yet, but we could also, you know, have, if there's something that occurs to you, we can capture that at the close of all the partner updates. So
Can I ask a question real quick, Leo?
yeah, sure.
So Jesse, with respect to the I-forms that you're using or starting to use, does that facilitate kind of the compilation of the data? Does that ease that transfer to an electronic format?
Yeah. Oh yes, it's great. Yeah, now sometimes entering hard copies is, yeah, you can see the difference, how inefficient hard copies is compared to the beauty of iForms. So strongly recommend iForms just because that's what we use, but there's a whole bunch of other options out there. Plus there's the QA/QC is very nice. So nothing will actually get synced into the database until I QA/QC each survey and look it over. So.
Thanks, Jesse. That's great. That's exciting stuff. And your whole program.
Yeah, we're pretty excited.
Yeah, just really just amazing. Any other questions for Jesse? Perfect. Then we should move on to the great state of Montana. I'm Craig Mclean.
Hello, everybody. Hope you can hear me. My name is Craig Mclean. I'm the AIS Early Detection and Monitoring Coordinator here at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. There's my contact information if you need to get a hold of going down the road. Next, please. So I wanted to give a quick a capture of what we did last year for those of you who maybe didn't catch previous meetings. So we covered the state pretty extensively, and this is not only FWP sampling, this is partners that we have throughout the state. In the Northwest, we have quite a few partners. We have some partners at Fort Pike Reservoir. Some of our more major waters, we have some partners that help us out, which is great. So we, can we go to the next slide, please? So part of this process is, you know, we can collect a lot of samples, but a lot of times the bottleneck is getting them processed within our lab. So we've started prioritizing all of our samples that come into our lab with essentially a risk associated to the risk assessments that we've performed on our waters. So the higher the number, the higher the risk. and the higher priority they get to get processed. So we have really good turnaround time for our highest risk ones. So that would be like Tiber Reservoir, hatcheries, some of our most major highest risk waters. And then we get into kind of the bulk of our samples that would be risk 3, as well as out-of-state samples that we get from Missouri River Basin states. And then our lowest risk 1s and 2s are the ones that are small, less frequently visited, lower risk in general. Those have a little bit quicker turnaround time than some of the others because we did push some of our samples out to a contractor that FWP collected just because of a backlog that we've had of our lab space. So this is kind of where it was last year. I'm hopeful this next year will look even better. We've shifted a few of our risks around on some of our lakes as things change, like Canyon Ferry being delisted as a suspect water for mussels. So some of those waters close to it have been lowered in their risk. And we'll probably see going forward, hopefully, a shift again once Tiber, if we don't find anything again, and that is delisted. And so we'll see a change in all of our risk assessments again for our waters. Next, please. So one of the biggest changes we've had within our monitoring program is our longtime lab tech, Gail Johnson, retired last year. So that's she has a big hole to fill. Keegan was a seasonal lab tech for a couple seasons, and so he now has accepted that role as the lead lab tech in Helena. So we've hired a new seasonal lab tech, and so we're fully staffed going into this season, which is awesome. Stacy's still the lab manager. She oversees all of that work. And we have Jaden up in Kalispell. He has essentially a small desk space that he uses to process a lot of our samples from our crews up in the Kalispell area. So I think this year, I'm hopeful we'll see a even quicker turnaround time with our full staff. And I think we'll see some good results. We have the backup again to send out some of our FWP samples if we start seeing a major backlog again, but we're hopeful we won't need it. Next. So last year, I think most of you are most interested probably in what's going on at Tiber Reservoir. So last year we collected over 100 plankton samples. We really threw everything we could at the lake like we have for the last, well, that would have been the 4th year. Lots of shoreline surveys. Flathead Lake Biological Station's been coming out, and in cooperation with BOR and FWP, we've been collecting eDNA samples. Last year we did twice a year. They even had a little ROV that they used to explore some of the areas closer to the dam, which would produce some interesting footage. One thing we used last year, which was new, we constructed a sled, a benthic sled, which is that picture in the middle. You can kind of see it emerging. So essentially it will scrape a top layer of sediment on the lake and go through a fine net, and then we can look through it for any sort of adults. So it works great at Tiber because it's a really fine sediment water body. There's not a lot of rocks or gravel, so it's really a great place to explore. So it even pulls up things like artificial substrates, like those Christmas trees that fish biologists throw out for perch habitat. So we even snagged a few of those, and which was great for us to look at these deep water artificial substrates. And so that was an added benefit. We had the Fish and Wildlife Services come out every year with their divers and have spent a couple days out there. They did again last year. Colder than I would want to be out. I think they did it in the fall, but again, working on some of those high risk areas, looking for any sort of evidence of adults. And then annually we bring out some detection dogs when the water's drawn down towards the fall to see if we can find anything. So we've thrown everything at it, and luckily everything is still coming back negative. So next. So no positive finds since that first round. So 2021 is year 5 of 5. So hopefully it could be our final year of intense sampling before some status changes petition for within our department. And we'll do something very similar to the last couple of years. We'll probably collect as many plankton samples as we have time to process, to really make sure we're good on that water. But I'm pretty excited about that. I know Stacy's really excited about that since she's been the one that's doing the bulk of the trips up to Tiber every month. So next. So for 2021, we've started sampling in May. Our crews are up and running. We trained them early May, and they will work through October. We have 3 teams of 2 that do the bulk of our sampling. They're scattered geographically throughout the state. So this is kind of a rough idea of what's going on in the state. So for FWP, we'll process approximately 2,200 samples, which is several hundred more than before, since from 2020. And our partners as well will be sampling in numbers pretty similar to what they have in the past. So I suspect we have over 3,000 samples in Montana, plankton samples, and including other sampling like shoreline surveys and artificial substrates. Next. So there's kind of geographically where those sampling events will occur. It looks pretty similar to past years. Our sampling among years is looking more and more similar as we've kind of nailed down some of the waters that we need to get to every year. There's a handful of waters that are on a 2 or 3 year rotations, so those are scattered throughout the state, especially in the east, where there's a lot of little potholes that are used a lot by locals that we try to rotate through them. Next. So this is kind of a cool tool that we've got up and running. I can't remember if we got it going this last spring or the fall before, but it's a dashboard that's tied into our data collection process. So this is available at cleandraindrymt.com. So if you go there, you can actually see where we're at real time as our crews work through. So this was pulled about a week ago. So you can see it's pretty cool. It shows some of the species that they've found, if there's any specific AIS species that they found during their surveys. Next. So going forward, I think I'm optimistic this year will be great. We've got a lot of returning staff that are our seasonal technicians. So it was a lot of more intense trainings that we normally don't get to do to help them develop professionally. And it was a lot of here's your list of samples and go forth and do good. And so I'm optimistic this year will be a smooth one, and both in the lab and in the field. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Craig. Do we have any questions for Craig? No, seeing none. Tim, do you have any questions for Craig?
I have a question. Craig, can you describe a little bit more about your rotating scheme? That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, so that is a legacy from our incident command when mussels were found in Canyon Ferry, or the suspect mussels in Canyon Ferry and the positive ones in Tiber. You know, we have a lot of waters and we don't have resources to sample all of them. So based upon the level of that kind of determines the frequency that those lakes or rivers are sampled. So the highest risk will receive multiple sampling events at the water body per year. So for Tiber, for example, the highest risk we have, obviously, we do that one monthly. Some of our partners have the ability to do that as well because they're local. But as they, you know, work through a 4 or 3. We're sampling all of those at least annually, sometimes twice a year. When we get into those risk 1s and 2s, those low priority ones, there's still benefit for us to get to them, but they might not be the top of our list to get there every year. And so we've rotate through them every 2 to 3 years. We try to get them at least every 3 years is kind of the maximum. And as we've gotten more efficient with our program, we've been able to kick more of those into an annual sampling. And that helps make our sampling plan a little bit easier as well, going into it every year. But there are some scenarios where, they might be close to some higher risk waters. They're getting use based on information that's provided by the fish biologist or others that know the local use patterns of those waters. And so we adjust accordingly as we get reports, or they might be waters that are being used occasionally from fish biologists that will move wild fish from one lake to stock another lake, and so those will come through on a somewhat 2 to 3 year rotation.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could sample every single one a whole bunch of times, but some of these sites, our crews, it will be 8-hour drive for them to get to the lake, so we just reasonably can't do all of them multiple times.
No, it's totally understandable, but it's great that you're able to check in on those lakes periodically.
Okay, I don't see any more questions for you, Craig. So Tim, you wanted to do British Columbia, Martina next, is that right?
Yeah, that'd be awesome to have Martina talk.
Okay, Martina,
Can you
would you
hear
like
me?
to unmute yourself? Yes, I can.
Great. And apologies, I didn't have the opportunity to put together a presentation, so I'll just be giving a verbal update this morning, and I'll start with our zebra quagga mussel lake monitoring. So part of our monitoring program, we do an annual review of our lake monitoring protocol, and within that protocol, we have our water body priority list, which we review on an annual basis, and we use a combination of looking at essentially risk of survival establishment using key water chemistry data that our other jurisdictions have already spoken about, and also then looking at sort of risk of introduction, looking at overall use, including looking at past data from our watercraft inspection stations, as well as consulting with our regional fisheries biologists to get their local knowledge on use of water bodies. So it's a combination of those two factors. One thing we did do this over the winter, our kind of base for looking at the risk of survival was a past federal risk assessment that was done by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but that was done back in 2013. And so wanting to bring in more recent water chemistry data that's available, in particular bringing in more recent calcium data that's available through our provincial environmental monitoring system database. So integrated additional calcium data to do an update analysis at a sub-watershed level, looking at risk of survival, and did look at a bit of analysis of air temperature as a proxy for water temperature. To integrate that in as well. pH is another factor that we looked at, whether that would change the overall risk ratings. In the end, we didn't directly bring that in, and so we did an update to that, and it's something that we'll basically be reviewing on an annual basis. So that helped inform our updated water body priority list, and we do partner with our sampling is done largely through different regional invasive species organizations situated throughout the province, and we have essentially a grant application process which applications are open to any external group that wants to apply. And so typically deadline is early February to apply for grants, and that covers the actual collection of the water samples, and community groups will apply, and we have a technical committee that reviews and makes sure that sampling locations and frequency aligns with our priority water body list, and that sampling is conducted using our provincial monitoring protocol. And then all the samples collected by these groups get sent to our designated lab that we have. It is an external, we don't have a in-government lab, but it's external to government that we have contracted, and the province actually covers the cost for the sample analysis separate from the granting that goes out to these groups. And last year we had 12 different community organizations that did sampling within the basin and across the province. This year we're expecting same number of groups to be sampling. We're also expecting our sampling efforts for plankton tows and substrate samplers to be similar to what we collected in 2020, which was just shy of 1,000 plankton tow samples that were collected across 89 different priority water bodies, as well as substrate samplers were deployed at 50 different locations. So anticipating similar levels this year. Grant agreements with those different organizations have been finalized, and sampling has started in a few locations already for this year. And in addition to that, we have been doing some ongoing collaboration with Dr. Karen Helbig at the University of Victoria, working on some assay development for zebra quagga mussels as well as Asian clam. So there's some additional specificity testing that is required, specificity testing with our native mussel species. So we'll be looking to try and do some field validation of that this coming year. So we don't currently yet have eDNA integrated into our operational sampling, but have some ongoing work with the UVic lab happening. In addition to our zebra quagga mussel sampling, we have been doing some shoreline surveys for Asian clams. So Asian clam have been present in the lower mainland in BC since around 2008. But in 2020, we confirmed a population in Shuswap Lake in the Thompson region, which does represent quite a large jump in their distribution. So we were able to partner with regional group to do some shoreline surveys in fall of 2020, and we did have some additional shoreline surveys occur this spring, tying into when there's lower water levels. We were able to also have some dive surveys conducted. So far, results have shown clams are just appear to be limited to one arm, the salmon arm of Shuswap Lake, and had some dive surveys done in that area to assess density and distribution. And so far, densities appear to be low and similar at depth as to what we're seeing along the shore in those areas that were surveyed. Additional shoreline surveys are planned for the fall, again, once we have lower water levels. Another update is in March of this year, we did receive a just public report of the Asian clam in the Pend Oreille, just downstream of the US border, right near the confluence with the Salmo River. We've had crews go out and do some shoreline surveys and did confirm and find Asian clam at one site. So we're just in the process of identifying some additional locations downstream from that in the Pend Oreille to do some additional shoreline surveys to determine extent within that. Not really surprising, given that they are known to be present upstream on the US side of the Pend Oreille. So likely seeing that coming through downstream spread. Also doing some shoreline surveys in Soyuz Lake. Of course, it's a transboundary water body connected with Washington, where Asian clams have been detected on the Washington side. To date, no detections, and maybe looking to partner with regional group on some additional survey work in that water body throughout the summer. And some other AIS monitoring, we are partnering with Okanagan Nation Alliance on some Northern Pike eDNA sampling in the Kettle River and Okanagan region, which is in addition to the ongoing pike suppression work that ONA leads in the lower Columbia River on the BC side. So I think I'll probably leave it there.
Great, Martina, thank you. I do have a question for you.
Of course.
Tom Wolf asks if you are seeing issues with specificity using eDNA for dracennates.
We haven't yet done sort of any field validation on the existing, but wanting to just do some of that native species validation just to be sure. So that's just kind of some of the initial stages, but we haven't actually had the chance to sort of do any field testing yet, but wanted to make sure we kind of cover our bases by trying to get that integrated in with the assay development.
Okay, thanks, Martina. Actually, I have a question, but I think directed to all of the, major monitoring entities. Are there any other considerations you're taking this season related to monitoring in light of the aquarium mossball issue that arose this year? Is any of that changing for you in BC, Martina, or any of the other states doing monitoring?
Yeah, it's a great question, Leah. We are doing a little bit of follow-up just to look at municipal wastewater treatments and systems. If there is risk of potentially contaminated aquarium water, for example, getting dumped, what treatment systems are in place in different locations where we know, for example, there were retailers that did have mossballs that were, being sold. And then based on that information, whether it may warrant just increasing some sampling in some specific locations. So we're still in the stages of assessing that information and whether we would do any more specific targeted sampling.
Thanks, Martina. Tim, do you have any other questions for Martina?
No, I really don't. But
Okay.
Thanks, Martina, so much for the talk.
Thank you.
Should we move on to Damian Walters?
Certainly, Damian. Are you there? There he is. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm similar. I don't have any slides, sorry. But this is basically the Corps of Engineers sampling. It's a coordination with the 3 districts, Portland, Seattle District, and Walla Walla District. So I reached out to my counterparts, and it's basically a kind of coordination with Portland State University. They provide us the sample jars, and then our folks go out and sample at various project locations. So in Portland, that's Bonneville, Dalles, and John Day. Those are typically monthly samples there. Last year with COVID, everything was kind of slowed down with the Corps as the policies out on vessels and everything, but we're hoping this summer everything's going to be up and full running. So Portland District with Bonneville, Dalles, and John Day should be back to their monthly sampling, typically late June through beginning of September. Dalles is actually hoping to do some bi-weekly, so we'll see. Hopefully that'll work out for them. As to Seattle District, we have Albany Falls, Chief Joe, and Libby are the 3 big ones. As folks know, probably from past presentations, we don't sample at Howard Hanson and Mud Mountain And I didn't get a response from my Lake Washington folks. I do believe they take samples, but I did not hear back from them yesterday. But so for Seattle District, those would be basically monthly samples taken late June through beginning September, typically 4 to 6 samples at each event. So the routine, and they'll ship samples in to Rich Miller. And then for Walla Walla, last year we were kind of stifled and we did not do Ice Harbor samples, but we're hoping we'll put Ice Harbor back into the mix. So we sample McNary Pool above Ice Harbor Dam, and then in the Lewiston Clarkson area and Lower Granite Dam. So that's the confluence of the Clearwater and the Snake. I apologize, I have a little bit of a rough voice. It's still recovering. Planning to do every 2 to 3 weeks and 3 samples at each event. And for all those projects, we do periodic substrate, checking at the locations that they sample, see if they see anything. And that's the quick synopsis. If there's any quick questions on that.
So I've got a question, Damien. So when the specific projects conduct their monitoring, is it like in the forebay, or are they sampling at the dam, or is it somewhere else?
Most in the upriver of the reservoir, so in the, I guess you call it the forebay, but up in the system some. And so they'll check at the boat launches where they're basically launching vessels. We do also have, which I do know we've done a very poor job in providing any data, but I know we would hear it as we do when we do dewater our fish ladders, and throughout the season, our fish biologists do inspect our fish ladder systems for anything. And I know that's a piece where we do it, but we don't get good data. I don't get any data sheets from them, but I know we heard something at one of our hydropower facilities.
Yes, I'm certain we would.
Okay, I don't see any direct questions for Damien. So, shall we do our next update then, Tim?
We shall. We should go to the great state of Idaho and Nick.
Okay. Nick, there you are.
Hey.
Okay. Let me see if I can find your picture to share.
And while Leah's pulling that up, I am working remotely from a boat inspection station in Southeast Idaho. So if I have to bug out for a little while and go check a boat, I do apologize. But this will just be a quick verbal update. You can see the map there of the 2020 monitoring. We did get through 2020 fairly well, given the challenges. We did collect just under 1,600 samples, which is typical for Idaho monitoring. We did not hire any seasonals last year, so we had to kind of manage that workload utilizing our full-time staff, which I have to give kudos to, as well as several local cooperators and program partners throughout the state that sample for us as well. So kudos, and my hope is that the regional map that was pulled up before, that everyone can kind of find their little corner of the state and see their efforts there real time. So we did go through a year of non-detect for quag and ear mussels, which once again, I think we should continue to celebrate. Obviously, there were some detections of various aquatic plants across the state that we're now working on, and then confirming population densities and distribution of other aquatic plants that have been historically in the state. So when we go out and monitor, we try to do an all taxa effort to program it, at the same time, because I have to agree with Craig and what he mentioned earlier that, we'd love to sample everybody's lake every year bi-weekly, and that's what we strive to do. But it is a big state and a lot of wind chill time. We try to maximize our time the best we can, but that is one of the limitations, and so with that, as we go into 2021 field season, we're kind of looking at what we achieved last year, We are bringing on seasonal staff across the state, which is great. We've already hired some of those already, and they've started monitoring both on the invasive sides and the aquatic plant noxious weed side. With that, I will say we have ran into some challenges with finding folks that want to work, both on the inspection, watercraft inspection side of the program, as well as the survey and monitoring side. And, I think that's being experienced elsewhere, everywhere. So it's just one of the challenges that we face now. But moving forward into 2021, I anticipate it being a very similar year to last year with the addition of the seasonal staff. We do both villager monitoring as well as adult monitoring. The villager side of things, we try to do those bi-monthly every 2 weeks based on priority, so critical, high, moderate. We require a 2-week turnaround for analysis results, microscopy, with our contracted lab, which is Aquaticus. Well, obviously many of you are aware of Aquaticus and what work he does down there, and it's great. So on the adult side of things, it's just a visual inspection at the point of the survey. It is all taxa. We are focused on everything listed in the invasive species rule and noxious weed list rule. This is a series of sonar grabs or rakes. We do substrate monitoring, drawdown shoreline walks, those kind of things. And across the board, we've seen an increase of monitoring since 2017. You guys are probably all aware of the word of funding for watercraft inspection. A smaller pot of funding is also available for monitoring. I think for Idaho, it's roughly $100,000 a year. Essentially, we've been able to double our efforts in the last few years due to that funding. So thank you to the Corps and Pacific States for funneling that funding down to the states to utilize. That funding is used for everything from analysis to supplies, material, some staff time, things like that. So thank you to that funding. And then I'll just wrap up where, you know, what you see on this map, most of it is our ISDA staff out doing the sampling. But mixed in there, and it's kind of hard to tell, but is our sampling partners. We've got folks from the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the Shoshone Paiutes, Idaho Power, and several counties, municipalities that are out sampling and looking along with our staff or separately and sending stuff to our contracted lab. And this is really what keeps this whole program going is the mixture of the two, because there is a lot of windshield time and a lot of ground to cover and a lot of different hats that these folks wear. So kudos to everybody sampling in Idaho. And then I'll just reiterate that the sampling going on in the basin and be able to see that on a map is just outstanding. So, and with that, that's the update.
I thought you were going to say a boat pulled up.
It did, Leah. That's why I'm getting my stuff.
Oh, shoot. I was going to ask you if you're doing anything from Mossball related, but that's okay. If you got to run, then you better go.
Yeah, we are, Leah. We're actually going to do a follow-up of the work that you did here for Don't Let It Loose, and we're doing routine monitoring following your visits. So.
Okay, cool. I guess if there's any other questions for Nick, we'll just have to hold those, or you can put them in the chat box.
I think the timing for that was just perfect.
Right, made it just in time. All right, so we go to Oregon then next. Okay.
Oregon is the worst.
All right, let's see. Okay, Martine, you're ready to go.
Okay, great. So I'll make this super brief because, like I said earlier, I'm actually training one of our new technicians now to work at the watercraft inspection station down in Brookings. So we didn't do any monitoring last year because of COVID, and also Oregon is so heavily monitored that it's kind of redundant sometimes. But this year we decided we'd do some monitoring. So we can go to the next slide. And we're going to do things a little bit differently this year. Normally we focus on in 2019 we did a lot of coastal waters, which hadn't been done. But this year we're going to focus on the Columbia River and then the lower Willamette River. So we're going to start our sampling pretty much in downtown Portland, and then run all the way, hitting spots along the way up to Tri-Cities in Washington. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the lower Willamette River, we're going to sample about 15 total river miles, and we'll collect we're just doing villager sampling, shoreline surveys, and we're also going to do calcium, pH. We're going to collect Secchi disk, depth, and surface water temperature. But we will collect one villager sample in each river mile, and we're going to focus those efforts around structure. Obviously, the lower Willamette does see a great deal of shipping traffic, and it hasn't been done, I think, for a long, long time. So we thought that it was important to sort of get an idea of what's going on in the lower Willamette. And we can go to the next slide. And so our next stop will be below Bonneville Dam. So we're going to do the whole area from the confluence of the Willamette upstream to the Bonneville Dam. And once again, we'll be focusing on a lot of where that shipping traffic occurs and around docks, especially the big commercial docks. We'll be collecting samples. We're going to be stopping at all of the boat ramps along the way also to do quick shoreline surveys as well. And we'll be working right up to the boat restricted zone of the tail race areas of Bonneville Dam. So go to the next slide. Okay, and then we'll get above Bonneville and we're going to sample Bonneville Pool, the Dalles Pool, and the John Day Reservoir. We're going to focus in the forebay areas and the mid reservoir and tail race areas of each one of the projects. So we'll get a lot of villager samples collected and shipped off to Aquaticus also, because Steve is the best at processing. So we'll get all those shipped off to him. And then next slide. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with the McNary Dam at the tail race and the forebay, and then the mid reservoir. We're going to go up to Tri-Cities right there. We're going to start at the confluence of the Snake and work upstream through Tri-Cities to kind of get that last bit of commercial traffic that moves through there. And once again, sampling boat ramps, structure, kind of focusing on those efforts. And so for total, we'll sample about 118 river miles, collecting one villager sample in each mile. And there'll be about 55 boat ramps total that we'll be doing shoreline surveys at. And it'll take us, about 3.5 weeks, hopefully, to get all this work done. And the way that it's structured is we can just kind of keep moving upstream and kind of just ticking off miles as we go. We don't have specific staff that is hired for this work. So we use our existing watercraft inspectors. So we're kind of limited on the number of weeks we can spend sampling. And then we just do a one-time effort each year. And then that's I think the next one is my last slide. So if anybody has any questions, I bet Tim does.
What are you trying to say, Martine?
Nothing. You always ask really good questions.
I do have a question from not Tim, if you're ready. So Mark Sitzma is asking if your field staff know what flowering rush looks like, and it would be a good idea to keep an eye out for it. So I guess it's kind of a comment.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'll be out there, so I'll be leading the crew and obviously I know what it looks like. And the crew that I'll be using is 2 of our permanent staff that work down at the Ashland station, and then another long-term seasonal. So yeah, they're all aware of what flowering rush looks like. We'll be looking at, you know, aquatic veg as well, kind of making anecdotal, collecting anecdotal data about that as well.
Great. Tim, do you have any other questions? I don't see any from my side.
I do have a question from Martine. So Martine, do you have a feel for this year? I know that you have in past years, but do you have a feel for this year, the other entities that are sampling in Oregon?
I don't, you know, which I was hoping to gain a little bit of information today to see who else is leading, you know, doing sampling efforts in Oregon and where they're planning to hit. So, which is kind of one of the reasons, you know, I feel like a lot of times with our monitoring, it's a smaller piece of the pie, because we have so many folks doing work in Oregon coming and sampling. So I think we thought this year we would focus on the Columbia and Willamette rivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which are important water bodies to be sure.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to know that. So if anybody has information along those lines, if you're sampling in the state of Oregon, if you could pass that information on to Martine or I.
Yeah, that'd be
that
great.
would be, yeah, that would be great. So we have a better idea. Go ahead, Martine.
I was going to say one last thing, and we're planning on being out the last 2 weeks in August and an early week and a half sometime in, you know, around the beginning of September as well. So we're not going to be sampling until a little bit later, if that affects anybody at all.
And so it would be good to have that information.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've done in the past is we've actually had a map depicting on where people were planning to sample for the upcoming field season, and that hasn't occurred in a while. So maybe that's something we might want to revisit given this particular difficulty, because that is one of the benefits of having that information, is understanding where the gaps are. So in lieu of that information, if we don't know, then it's hard to determine that. So, but it sounds like that would be useful to you, right, Martine?
Yes.
Perfect. Any other questions for Martine?
I guess to continue asking my same question over and over again, Martine, has Oregon made any different considerations to your monitoring based on the moss ball incident?
I think Rick is better at answering that one, but what we're doing is we're doing it more out of the sort of local office level. So with the ODFW offices, they've been reaching out to a lot of the pet stores and aquarium suppliers where, yeah, we have, and then I know we're going to set up I'm going to collect some extra samples possibly at like high risk dump sites, you know, where we get a lot of people that are dumping their aquariums. So I know we're going to be doing some additional monitoring for that as well. But there isn't currently we don't have a plan in place, but I know that that's on the books.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see, Tim, shall we move to, oh wait, it looks like I do have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, these things can move quickly here. Okay, I guess Teresa asks if you have any update on, it's not quagga zebra, but do you have any update on the Cuban tree frogs in Oregon?
Oh, that'll be another good one for Rick.
Okay,
I know he was
we'll save that for later.
Yeah, he was working with our statewide vet on some of those issues, and then one of our other ODFW offices. So
okay.
Yeah, Rick can handle that one.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have no idea other than what I just told you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, I think that
All
that
right.
would bring us to our final presentation from Washington
Yes.
State University.
Indeed, it would. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Steve Bolins, are you there?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Excellent. Okay, well, I realize we're getting close to the lunch hour, so I'll try to be quick about this. I'd like to start by acknowledging my co-investigators on this, Dr. Gretchen Rollwagen-Bolins and Julie Zimmerman, all of us from WSU. Next slide, please. And since just back in December, I presented the results from our 2020 monitoring, which was all negative. Our 600 plus samples last year all came back negative, is the good news. And we're going to be undertaking a very similar, indeed, we hope identical sampling this year. The number of samples and the locations are shown in this table. We're going to be sampling bi-weekly from May through October. Next slide. And just to put this in more of a geographic context, we're focused on the lower Columbia River, downstream as far as Vancouver, Portland, and upstream as far as Lake Celilo. Next slides, please. And I wanted to make some comments here about the risk assessment data that went into our choices of these sampling locations. And going back to the earlier, much earlier work of Steve Wells and others, the lower Columbia was identified as being a very high risk of introduction for dry synods and a medium risk for establishment. But these were based on very few data. And you see those two calcium concentrations in particular, 16 milligrams per liter. We wanted to revisit this and do some additional sampling. Next slide, please. And at the Vancouver campus of WSU, we're fortunate to have a new water chemistry facility run by John Harrison and Mark Kramer. Next slide, please. And there are a variety, a variety of instruments in this facility. The most germane to the calcium is the ICP-MS. And we collected about 150 samples between 2018 and 2020. Next slide, please. And these results were recently published, indeed, just last month or two ago. And the title really says it all here. Calcium concentrations in the lower Columbia River are generally sufficient to support invasive bivalve spread. Next slide, please. This slide is particularly busy. I apologize for that, but if you zero in on any one of these stations, you'll see that the summer samples, summer calcium concentrations are in red and the winter concentrations are in blue. And in virtually all cases, the concentrations exceed the 12 milligram per liter threshold that's thought to limit dry synods. And indeed, in the vast majority of cases, they're above 15 milligrams per liter. There are a couple of cases of winter dilution from tributaries, but again, the vast majority of the concentrations are above 15 milligrams per liter. Next slide, please. And when we added our own data from WSU into the larger USGS NWIS data set, so comprising more than a couple thousand data points, what you see here is quite high concentrations in eastern Washington, substantially lower concentrations in the Willamette Valley, but along the lower Columbia River where WSU has been sampling, again, concentrations generally in the 15 to 20 milligrams per liter, certainly sufficient to support dry synods. Next slide, please. And so given our particular locations, again, ranging from Lake Sligo upstream to Vancouver downstream, next slide, we identified the risk of introduction of dry synods as high. Next slide, the risk of establishment as medium. Next, the potential economic impacts with the hydropower infrastructure, et cetera, is extremely high. And indeed, the potential ecological impacts also extremely high. Next slide. And then in terms of the allocation of samples by different methods, primarily we're collecting plankton tows, but we're also doing some eDNA sampling as well. For the plankton tows, our primary form of analysis is cross-polarized light microscopy. And then on a subset of samples, we're also using the flow cam to identify dry synods. The eDNA samples, I should note, are being processed by the USGS Upper Midwest Environmental Science Center, whereas the veliger samples of plankton tow is done in our laboratories at WSU Vancouver. Next slide, please. And so for the good news for 2021, this is obviously very preliminary based only on the May samples, but we have not detected any dry synod veligers in our cross-polarized light microscopy, and the eDNA flow cam samples are yet, sample analyses are yet to come. But so far, so good for 2021. And again, this is consistent with our results from last year as well. Next slide, please. So this next slide may seem like a jump from the topic at hand, but if you bear with me for a minute, I think you'll see the connection. This is from a different paper that our research group just published in Inland Waters that reports a series of laboratory experiments on the ingestion rate of the Asian clam, Corbicula fluminea, as a function of food concentration. So on the y-axis there, you see ingestion rate from 0 to as high as 1 microgram chlorophyll per gram wet weight clam per hour. And then on the x-axis, chlorophyll concentration ranges from less than 1 microgram per liter to as high as 8. And what you see is that the ingestion rate increases as food concentration increases. And if you think of ingestion rate as a proxy for growth and reproduction, this indicates that for the Asian clam anyway, food is limiting over a broad range of food concentrations. Next slide. And just to put this into context, here is the seasonal pattern of chlorophyll abundance in the lower Columbia River. This is from a separate paper published recently by one of our PhD students, Eric Dexter. And you see the spring bloom in March, April, May generally is at 10 or higher micrograms per liter. But for the rest of the year, chlorophyll falls into this range of 1 to 8, or that range in which our experiments indicated food was limiting to the ingestion and thus probably the growth and reproduction of Corbicula. Now, these are not data for dry synods, but I nevertheless bring this to folks' attention to encourage us as much as is possible to collect ancillary environmental data when we're out there making observations on presence or absence of dry synods. I'm not suggesting that everyone should be collecting chlorophyll samples because it does require time and money to process those samples. But nevertheless, such data would be very helpful in refining our view of what constitutes high quality habitat for invasive bivalves. And I believe that's my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, just a quick comment here. We were asked what went well and what posed difficulties, and really everything has gone extremely well for us. We've been doing this for many years, so It's a great team effort, but we have become a well-oiled machine, if you will. And just a quick comment on COVID, that did slow us down several weeks in our processing of samples last year, but fortunately that is now all behind us. We're back up to full speed with both the collection and the near real-time processing of our samples in 2021. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that folks have.
Great, thanks, Steve. I don't see any questions yet. Tim, any questions for?
Yes, thanks, Leah. With respect to the chlorophyll issue that you presented, Steve, is what you're trying to imply is that it could be another factor in determining what lakes are most at risk for establishment?
That's correct. And if you think of this in very broad general strokes, the amount of food available is likely to be a limiting factor for virtually any organism or population. We've shown that it's clearly the case for Asian clams in the lower Columbia River, and I suspect it'll turn out to be the case for dry sennets. Work done elsewhere shows that calcium is perhaps the environmental correlate most strongly associated with dry sennets, but there's certainly others as well, and chlorophyll, at least having some chlorophyll data with which to evaluate that would be quite helpful.
Thanks. I guess there's different ways of measuring chlorophyll generally. You could do it through using spectrometry, or you could use a Secchi disc, right? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, no, in that case, I'd have to say no, that you can use in situ fluorometry, or you can collect water samples and then extract the chlorophyll back in the lab and then run that process sample through a fluorometer. But to determine chlorophyll, those are the two standard methods. A Secchi disc gives you a measure of water clarity, but to distinguish chlorophyll from sediments, ceston, other particles is impossible. So Secchi disc or water clarity, water transparency can be helpful, but it is quite different from measuring chlorophyll itself.
Thanks, Steve. That's really helpful.
Okay, I do have a question. This is from Anthony with Bureau of Reclamation, and I think others may chime in beyond you, just Steve, but others if they have feedback. What are folks doing if they're collecting pH, surface sample or a profile? So I don't know if that applies to you, Steve, if you want to comment.
Well, I can quickly comment on that, and then others should indeed weigh in. But in our case, we, as part of this work that is funded by WRDA, we take surface samples, except in the case of the veligers, the plankton toes are done as vertical hauls. But in terms of the ancillary environmental data, we're making surface measurements. Some of our other research in the lower Columbia River, funded by other projects, other research grants, has certainly done vertical profiling, is quite interested in that. The good news, if you want to interpret it that way, is that the lower Columbia is generally very well mixed vertically, such that surface measurements of at least some variables are representative of the water column as a whole. But I'll leave it to others to comment on the degree to which they are taking profiles versus surface samples.
Okay, do any of the states or BC, do you want to comment on your pH collection methods? I guess not for now. Okay.
Well, what I would say is that, you know, if we could get that type of information to Anthony, that might be useful for him, because I know he's looking at some of the dynamics associated with using pH to do these types of risk assessments. So
Great.
if you have that information and you can provide it to Anthony, I think that would be great.
This is
Okay.
Jesse with Washington. I was just going to say that we take our water quality measurements where our artificial substrate is, and then for our dissolved calcium at the surface.
Thanks, Jesse.
Okay. I don't see any new questions. I did want to acknowledge, I did get a comment. I think the intention was to have Portland State University, who does quite a bit of monitoring, give a report, but they're not in attendance today. So in a perfect world, they would have been providing info. So yes. So Tim, do you have any closing comments here on the monitoring forum?
Just in general, thank you so much for everybody that contributed to the session. Again, if you have any suggestions for topics for these forums, please let me know any ways that we can improve them. But other than that, I always find them very informative, and I appreciate all the effort that goes into people contributing to them. So with that, I know that we're pretty much a little bit over time here, but I've found everything to be just great. Any thoughts, Stephen or Leo?
No, I think we're in great shape. Thank you all to the presenters, and I guess you can leave if you, hopefully you will be attending this afternoon's portion of the webinar. Go ahead and take a nice break and get refueled, and we'll start back in roughly 40 minutes, I guess, at this point. So at 12:45 Pacific time. Yeah, and I don't see any new questions or chat. Stephen, do you have any other comments before we take a break?
No, I think we're good to go to break. Thanks for all the great presentations.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. Basin AIS team meeting. Stephen Phillips.
Hi, everyone. I'm just seeing with attendees what we've got.